The cool, polished marble of the Thorne estate stretched endless beneath Eleanor Vance's delicate slippers. Her footsteps, soft as a sigh, seemed to whisper down the vast, silent halls, swallowed by the immense space. Sunlight, a pale, filtered gold, struggled through the heavy, brocaded drapes, casting long, muted shadows across priceless antiques and gilded ceilings. The air, conditioned to a perfect, unchanging temperature, carried the faint, expensive scent of lemon polish, aged leather, and old money. She paused, tracing the intricate pattern of a vibrant Persian rug with the tip of her slippered toe. Her gaze, distant and unfocused, held a quiet melancholy. This house, a monument to Dominic's formidable power and meticulous taste, felt less like a home and more like a carefully constructed mausoleum. Every ornate detail, every meticulously placed objet d'art only served to emphasize the profound emptiness that resided within its walls. Her own reflection, caught fleetingly in the polished surface of an antique armoire, appeared small and fragile, almost entirely swallowed by the overwhelming grandeur that surrounded her. She wore a silk dressing gown, a pale, dusty blue that mirrored the faded color of her eyes. Those eyes once held a brighter, more eager spark, but now they simply watched, waiting for something that never quite came. A deep, familiar ache settled in her chest, a silent companion in the opulent quiet. Her phone vibrated then, a sudden jarring buzz that cut through the plush silence like a sharp knife. She pulled it from the deep pocket of her gown, the cold glass screen illuminating her face in a stark blue glow. It was a message from Marcus, Dominic's immaculately efficient assistant. The text was brief, devoid of any personal warmth, stark and to the point. Mr. Thorne will be indefinitely absent due to pressing business. Further updates will be provided as necessary. Eleanor read the cold words twice, then a third time, each repetition twisting a familiar knot tighter in her stomach. There was no apology, not even a hint of a possible return date, and certainly no personal message from Dominic himself. Just the cold, professional efficiency of an aide. She knew exactly what indefinitely absent truly meant. It meant another string of lonely nights, stretching out before her like an uninviting road. It meant another series of meals eaten in profound, echoing silence, another long stretch of days where her only company would be the distant, respectful staff. A bitter taste like ash and regret coated her tongue, clinging to the roof of her mouth. She had learned long ago not to hold on to hope where Dominic was concerned, yet still a tiny foolish part of her always did. That tiny resilient part now felt utterly crushed, like a fragile flower under a heedless boot. A slow, heavy blink brought a film of moisture to her eyes, but no tears fell. The evening descended, painting the grand windows in shades of deep indigo and violet, the last streaks of sunset fading into a starless canvas. Eleanor found herself seated, as always, at the immense dining table, meticulously set for two. Crystal goblets gleamed under the soft, almost shy glow of the antique chandelier, diaphane hanging high above. Silverware, heavy and cold in her grasp, lay precisely aligned beside plates of imported porcelain, each adorned with a delicate, hand-painted border. The rich aroma of roasted lamb, prepared by the estate's private chef, wafted enticingly from under a shining silver cloche. Yet the chair directly opposite her remained empty, a silent, mocking testament to Dominic's perpetual absence. A second crystal wine glass filled with a deep, ruby claret sat untouched beside the other setting. Its untouched presence spoke louder, more profoundly than any words could have. Eleanor picked at her food, each mouthful a conscious, arduous chore, tasteless on her tongue despite the rich flavors. The immense silence of the room pressed in on her, vast and profound, a physical weight. She could hear the soft, almost imperceptible clinking of her own cutlery as she moved it, the rustle of her silk dress against the chair, the slow, steady beat of her own heart in her ears. Each sound was amplified, echoing in the cavernous space, making her feel even more acutely alone, isolated in this gilded cage. She lifted her own wine glass, the chill of the crystal, a stark contrast to the warmth she craved, the burning emptiness within her. She took a small sip, the rich liquid doing little to soothe the growing, relentless ache within her chest. It simply added another layer of coldness. Her gaze drifted slowly around the dining room, taking in the intricate antique tapestries, their threads worn smooth by centuries. She looked at the solemn oil paintings depicting stern, stoic ancestors she did not know, their eyes following her from their heavy gold frames. They seemed to stare down at her with an air of judgment, or perhaps simply a chilling indifference. The silent weight of their scrutiny felt heavy, an oppressive reminder of the legacy she had married into, a legacy that offered everything material and nothing emotional. She thought of the early days, the whispered promises exchanged in the brief, rare moments when Dominic had allowed himself to be truly vulnerable. Those memories now felt like brittle, faded photographs, crumbling and insubstantial with every passing year. The harsh reality was this table, this suffocating silence, this untouched wine glass. The air in the room grew heavier with each passing minute, thick with unspoken longing and profound, inescapable isolation. She pushed her plate away with a faint, almost inaudible scrape, the thought of another bite utterly unbearable. The meal, a lavish feast prepared for a ghost, was finally over. Her hands, delicate and unblemished, rested on the cool, smooth linen tablecloth, feeling the crisp fabric against her skin. She longed for a touch, a presence, anything to break the suffocating quiet that enveloped her. The journey to her bedroom felt impossibly long, a winding path through corridors lined with more art, more echoes, more silence. The thick plush carpet absorbed her footsteps, denying even that small measure of sound, leaving her feeling strangely disembodied. The air, always perfectly controlled, seemed to hold a chill that pierced deeper than her delicate silk dressing gown. Her suite, larger than many apartments, was a sanctuary of undeniable luxury, yet it felt like a prison built entirely of loneliness. The vast bed, draped in rich, heavy fabrics, seemed to stretch out endlessly, threatening to swallow her whole. She moved mechanically, shedding her robe, letting it fall in a soft, silken heap onto the polished wooden floor, with a barely perceptible sigh of fabric. The subtle scent of lavender, diffused throughout the room by hidden mechanisms, offered a momentary fleeting comfort, a brief whisper of peace before it faded. She stood before the tall, arched window, looking out into the moonlit expanse of the estate grounds. The meticulously manicured garden stretched out into the vast darkness, enclosed by high, imposing walls and dense, ancient foliage. Beyond that, the distant, shimmering lights of the city were a world she could see, a vibrant tapestry of life, but one she could never truly enter. Her reflection in the glass was a pale, indistinct figure, a ghost within her own home. She pressed her hand against the cool pane, feeling the smooth, unyielding surface, a mirror to her own trapped existence. A deep sigh escaped her lips, a fragile sound immediately lost in the immense silence of the room. She turned from the window, crossing to her bedside table. The lamp, a delicate antique with a carved alabaster base, cast a soft, warm glow, but it did little to dispel the deep shadows that seemed to cling stubbornly to the corners of the cavernous room. She picked up a book, its pages pristine and unread, its cover smooth under her fingers, then set it back down. The words would blur, the meaning would not penetrate the heavy fog of her thoughts tonight. The overwhelming stillness of the house was a constant companion, a heavy, suffocating cloak she could not shed. She slipped between the cool, crisp sheets of the bed, the expensive fabric a sensual whisper against her skin, offering a fleeting moment of sensory distraction. The large space beside her remained utterly empty, a vast, echoing chasm that spoke only of absence. She closed her eyes, trying desperately to conjure sleep, to escape the relentless, pressing quiet. The only sound in the cavernous bedroom, the only constant presence, was the low, steady hum of the estate's sophisticated security systems, a mechanical, impersonal heartbeat in the heart of her gilded cage. The distant hum of the estate's security systems had been Eleanor's lullaby, a cold reminder of the walls that both protected and imprisoned her. The next evening, those walls were replaced by the glittering, indifferent facade of the city's grandest ballroom. Its soaring ceilings, draped in silk and studded with crystal chandeliers, reflected the wealth of the assembled guests. Each face was a mask of practiced politeness, each laugh a careful performance. Eleanor moved through the crowd, a vision in sapphire silk, feeling less like a woman and more like a carefully crafted exhibit. Her hand, encased in a delicate white glove, clutched a small silver clutch bag. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive cologne, felt heavy in her lungs. She had dressed with a quiet, desperate hope. Perhaps tonight, in this public setting, Dominic would remember the woman he married. She saw him across the room, a magnetic force field around him, drawing in the city's power brokers like moths to a flame. His tailored suit was a second skin, his dark hair gleaming beneath the soft glow of a spotlight. There was a brief moment, a fleeting glance from his sharp eyes that caught hers. A tiny tremor ran through her, a familiar rush of warmth and longing. She started to make her way towards him, a carefully composed smile on her lips. The clinking of champagne glasses and the low murmur of conversation formed a backdrop to her steady approach. She tasted the dry, metallic edge of anticipation on her tongue. "Dominic," she began, her voice a soft melody reaching him as he concluded a hearty handshake with a formidable-looking man. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, the silk of her glove, a subtle caress against his sleeve. She thought of a shared joke, a memory from a time when their smiles were real. Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly, yearning for a response. He turned, his smile already in place, but it did not reach his eyes. It was a practiced, superficial gesture, a social veneer that slipped over his face like a mask. "Eleanor," he said, the word a mere formality, devoid of any genuine warmth. He gave her a brief, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes already scanning the room beyond her, searching for the next connection, the next transaction. The man he had just greeted, Mr. Davies, offered her a polite, almost pitying nod before Dominic gestured vaguely towards him. "Mr. Davies, my wife, Eleanor." Before she could offer more than a polite greeting, Dominic's attention had already drifted. He gestured to another man, a senator, standing nearby. "Eleanor, I need to speak with Senator Thompson about the new zoning proposal. It is rather urgent." His hand, the one she had just touched, now rested lightly on the senator's back, guiding him away. He did not ask her to join, did not introduce her properly. He simply turned, his broad back a solid wall between them, leaving her standing alone, her hands still hovering in the space where his arm had been. The warmth from his sleeve was already fading from her fingertips. The senator offered her a fleeting, apologetic glance as he was pulled into Dominic's orbit. Eleanor's carefully constructed smile faltered. Her heart gave a painful lurch, a familiar ache spreading through her chest. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt thinner, harder to breathe. She could feel the silent, curious glances of other guests, sensing her public dismissal. Her cheeks flushed with a heat that had nothing to do with the warmth of the room. She felt a prickling behind her eyes, a familiar precursor to tears she absolutely could not shed here. She retreated to the periphery of the room, finding a spot near a towering display of white roses, their scent cloying and sweet. Her fingers locked around the stem of an untouched champagne flute on a passing tray. She knew if she let go, she would spill it. The clatter of ice in glasses, the low hum of conversation, began to press in on her, a cacophony of indifference. She tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the intricate pattern of the chandelier above, but her vision blurred slightly. Then the whispers started. They were not directed at her, but they found her nonetheless, snaking through the ambient noise, sharp and insidious. Two women, their faces flushed from too much wine and too much gossip, stood barely 10 feet away. One, her voice a low, theatrical murmur, leaned closer to the other. Eleanor could not help but catch fragments. "Did you hear about Dominic Thorne?" the first woman whispered, her eyes wide with feigned discretion. "Always tied up in these late-night meetings, they say." The second woman giggled, a brittle, knowing sound. "Oh, everyone knows about his late-night meetings. But I heard there's a new development." Her gaze flickered subtly towards the direction Dominic had taken, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Her grip on the champagne flute tightened until her knuckles were white. The crystal felt like ice against her skin. She forced herself not to turn, not to show any sign that she was listening, even though every fiber of her being screamed. She felt as if she had swallowed a piece of ice, cold and sharp in her throat. "A new development?" the first woman pressed, her curiosity piqued. "Yes," the second replied, lowering her voice further, though it still cut through the background noise like a razor. A new lady friend, quite striking, I'm told, young, ambitious. She paused, allowing the implication to hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Not that poor Eleanor would ever know. She lives in that mausoleum of an estate. She probably thinks he's simply working late. A short, derisive laugh followed. The words struck Eleanor like physical blows, each syllable a shard of glass piercing her carefully constructed composure. Lady friend. The phrase echoed in her mind, a mocking refrain. It was not just an affair, it was an open secret, a topic of cruel amusement among these people. The public humiliation was far worse than the private betrayal. Her entire life, her entire marriage, was a spectacle for their whispered judgments. She felt her face drain of color, a cold clamminess spreading over her skin. The elegant sapphire gown suddenly felt like a costume, a cruel mockery of her true state. A wave of nausea washed over her, rising from the pit of her stomach. The scent of lilies, once cloying, now became sickeningly sweet, pressing against her senses. The polished floor beneath her feet seemed to tilt, then sway. The entire room, with its glittering lights and swirling figures, began to spin, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The faces of the guests morphed into indistinct blurs, their smiles grotesque, their whispers turning into an indistinguishable roar. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp, painful gasp. She tried to inhale deeply, but her lungs refused to fully expand. It felt as if an invisible hand had clamped around her windpipe, squeezing the air out of her. Her heart began to race, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, growing louder and louder until it drowned out all other sounds. The pressure in her chest intensified, a crushing weight that threatened to buckle her knees. She felt lightheaded, her vision darkening at the edges. Not here, she pleaded silently, her mind racing. Not now. She needed air, space, anything to escape the suffocating walls of the ballroom, the judging eyes, the insidious whispers that now seemed to echo Dominic's indifference. Her palms grew slick with perspiration inside her gloves. The champagne flute, still in her hand, felt impossibly heavy, threatening to slip. She could feel the delicate tremors starting in her fingers, then spreading up her arms. Her mouth was suddenly dry, her tongue thick and unresponsive. She tried to swallow, but her throat constricted, refusing to obey. The vibrant colors of the gala, the rich reds and golds, now seemed to pulse and swim before her eyes, blurring into a disorienting kaleidoscope. The ground felt unstable, as if she were standing on the deck of a ship tossed in a storm. She leaned against the wall, hoping the solid surface would anchor her, but it offered no comfort, only the cold, unyielding reality of her situation. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead, trickling down her temples. She could feel her elegant hairstyle starting to come undone, loose strands clinging to her damp skin. The heavy scent of perfume from the roses suddenly felt like a physical barrier, choking her. She needed to escape, to find a quiet corner, a place where she could breathe, where the world wouldn't spin quite so violently. Her mind screamed for silence, for darkness, for anything but this overwhelming assault on her senses. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to move, one trembling step after another. She had to get away before anyone noticed, before her carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. She imagined the pitying glances, the knowing smirks, if she collapsed here. The thought spurred her on, lending a desperate strength to her trembling limbs. She murmured a hasty, almost inaudible apology to an elderly woman she nearly bumped into, not even sure if the words registered. She spotted a discreet archway leading to a less frequented corridor, a sliver of hope in the suffocating grandeur. It was dimly lit, promising a brief respite from the glaring lights and the endless chatter. She pushed through a velvet rope, ignoring the slight jingle it made, her entire focus on reaching that quiet passage. Every nerve ending in her body felt frayed, exposed. The silk of her gown rustled as she moved, a sound that seemed deafeningly loud to her hypersensitive ears. The corridor led to a heavy oak door, which in turn opened on to a secluded balcony. It was a narrow space, offering a view of the city lights shimmering in the distance, a stark contrast to the stifling opulence of the ballroom. A gust of cool night air, fresh and clean, hit her face as she pushed the door open, a welcome shock to her heated skin. She stumbled out, almost tripping on the threshold, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere inside. The cool air tasted like salvation, but it did little to quell the rising tide of panic. She walked to the railing, her hands gripping the cold metal, her knuckles white. The city below sprawled out, a glittering tapestry of indifference. She leaned over, taking deep, ragged gulps of air, her chest heaving with the effort. Her heart pounded erratically, a wild bird trapped within her ribs, threatening to burst free. The first tendrils of panic, cold and relentless, coiled around her, tightening their grip with every gasping breath. The distant hum of the estate's security systems had been Eleanor's lullaby, a cold reminder of the walls that both protected and imprisoned her. The next evening, those walls were replaced by the glittering, indifferent facade of the city's grandest ballroom. Its soaring ceilings, draped in silk and studded with crystal chandeliers, reflected the wealth of the assembled guests. Each face was a mask of practiced politeness, each laugh a careful performance. Eleanor moved through the crowd, a vision in sapphire silk, feeling less like a woman and more like a carefully crafted exhibit. Her hand, encased in a delicate white glove, clutched a small silver clutch bag. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive cologne, felt heavy in her lungs. She had dressed with a quiet, desperate hope. Perhaps tonight, in this public setting, Dominic would remember the woman he married. She saw him across the room, a magnetic force field around him, drawing in the city's power brokers like moths to a flame. His tailored suit was a second skin, his dark hair gleaming beneath the soft glow of a spotlight. There was a brief moment, a fleeting glance from his sharp eyes that caught hers. A tiny tremor ran through her, a familiar rush of warmth and longing. She started to make her way toward him, a carefully composed smile on her lips. The clinking of champagne glasses and the low murmur of conversation formed a backdrop to her steady approach. She tasted the dry metallic edge of anticipation on her tongue. "Dominic," she began, her voice a soft melody reaching him as he concluded a hearty handshake with a formidable-looking man. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, the silk of her glove a subtle caress against his sleeve. She thought of a shared joke, a memory from a time when their smiles were real. Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly, yearning for a response. He turned, his smile already in place, but it did not reach his eyes. It was a practiced, superficial gesture, a social veneer that slipped over his face like a mask. "Eleanor," he said, the word a mere formality, devoid of any genuine warmth. He gave her a brief, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes already scanning the room beyond her, searching for the next connection, the next transaction. The man he had just greeted, Mr. Davies, offered her a polite, almost pitying nod before Dominic gestured vaguely towards him. "Mr. Davies, my wife, Eleanor." Before she could offer more than a polite greeting, Dominic's attention had already drifted. He gestured to another man, a senator, standing nearby. "Eleanor, I need to speak with Senator Thompson about the new zoning proposal. It is rather urgent." His hand, the one she had just touched, now rested lightly on the senator's back, guiding him away. He did not ask her to join, did not introduce her properly. He simply turned, his broad back a solid wall between them, leaving her standing alone, her hand still hovering in the space where his arm had been. The warmth from his sleeve was already fading from her fingertips. The senator offered her a fleeting, apologetic glance as he was pulled into Dominic's orbit. Eleanor's carefully constructed smile faltered. Her heart gave a painful lurch, a familiar ache spreading through her chest. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt thinner, harder to breathe. She could feel the silent, curious glances of other guests, sensing her public dismissal. Her cheeks flushed with a heat that had nothing to do with the warmth of the room. She felt a prickling behind her eyes, a familiar precursor to tears she absolutely could not shed here. She retreated to the periphery of the room, finding a spot near a towering display of white roses, their scent cloying and sweet. Her fingers locked around the stem of an untouched champagne flute on a passing tray. She knew if she let go, she would spill it. The clatter of ice in glasses, the low hum of conversation began to press in on her, a cacophony of indifference. She tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the intricate pattern of the chandelier above. But her vision blurred slightly. Then the whispers started. They were not directed at her, but they found her nonetheless, snaking through the ambient noise, sharp and insidious. Two women, their faces flushed from too much wine and too much gossip, stood barely 10 feet away. One, her voice a low, theatrical murmur, leaned closer to the other. Eleanor could not help but catch fragments. "Did you hear about Dominic Thorne?" the first woman whispered, her eyes wide with feigned discretion. "Always tied up in these late-night meetings, they say." The second woman giggled, a brittle, knowing sound. "Oh, everyone knows about his late-night meetings. But I heard there's a new development." Her gaze flickered subtly towards the direction Dominic had taken, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Her grip on the champagne flute tightened until her knuckles were white. The crystal felt like ice against her skin. She forced herself not to turn, not to show any sign that she was listening, even though every fiber of her being screamed. She felt as if she had swallowed a piece of ice, cold and sharp in her throat. "A new development?" the first woman pressed, her curiosity piqued. "Yes," the second replied, lowering her voice further, though it still cut through the background noise like a razor. "A new lady friend. Quite striking, I'm told. Young, ambitious." She paused, allowing the implication to hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Not that poor Eleanor would ever know. She lives in that mausoleum of an estate. She probably thinks he's simply working late. A short, derisive laugh followed. The words struck Eleanor like physical blows, each syllable a shard of glass piercing her carefully constructed composure. "Lady friend." The phrase echoed in her mind, a mocking refrain. It was not just an affair, it was an open secret, a topic of cruel amusement among these people. The public humiliation was far worse than the private betrayal. Her entire life, her entire marriage, was a spectacle for their whispered judgments. She felt her face drain of color, a cold clamminess spreading over her skin. The elegant sapphire gown suddenly felt like a costume, a cruel mockery of her true state. A wave of nausea washed over her, rising from the pit of her stomach. The scent of lilies, once cloying, now became sickeningly sweet, pressing against her senses. The polished floor beneath her feet seemed to tilt, then sway. The entire room, with its glittering lights and swirling figures, began to spin, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The faces of the guests morphed into indistinct blurs, their smiles grotesque, their whispers turning into an indistinguishable roar. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp, painful gasp. She tried to inhale deeply, but her lungs refused to fully expand. It felt as if an invisible hand had clamped around her windpipe, squeezing the air out of her. Her heart began to race, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, growing louder and louder until it drowned out all other sounds. The pressure in her chest intensified, a crushing weight that threatened to buckle her knees. She felt lightheaded, her vision darkening at the edges. "Not here," she pleaded silently, her mind racing. Not now. She needed air, space, anything to escape the suffocating walls of the ballroom, the judging eyes, the insidious whispers that now seemed to echo Dominic's indifference. Her palms grew slick with perspiration inside her gloves. The champagne flute, still in her hand, felt impossibly heavy, threatening to slip. She could feel the delicate tremors starting in her fingers, then spreading up her arms. Her mouth was suddenly dry, her tongue thick and unresponsive. She tried to swallow, but her throat constricted, refusing to obey. The vibrant colors of the gala, the rich reds and golds, now seemed to pulse and swim before her eyes, blurring into a disorienting kaleidoscope. The ground felt unstable, as if she were standing on the deck of a ship tossed in a storm. She leaned against the wall, hoping the solid surface would anchor her, but it offered no comfort, only the cold, unyielding reality of her situation. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead, trickling down her temples. She could feel her elegant hairstyle starting to come undone, loose strands clinging to her damp skin. The heavy scent of perfume from the roses suddenly felt like a physical barrier, choking her. She needed to escape, to find a quiet corner, a place where she could breathe, where the world wouldn't spin quite so violently. Her mind screamed for silence, for darkness, for anything but this overwhelming assault on her senses. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to move. one trembling step after another. She had to get away before anyone noticed, before her carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. She imagined the pitying glances, the knowing smirks, if she collapsed here. The thought spurred her on, lending a desperate strength to her trembling limbs. She murmured a hasty, almost inaudible apology to an elderly woman she nearly bumped into, not even sure if the words registered. She spotted a discreet archway leading to a less frequented corridor or a sliver of hope in the suffocating grandeur. It was dimly lit, promising a brief respite from the glaring lights and the endless chatter. She pushed through a velvet rope, ignoring the slight jingle it made, her entire focus on reaching that quiet passage. Every nerve ending in her body felt frayed, exposed. The silk of her gown rustled as she moved, a sound that seemed deafeningly loud to her hypersensitive ears. The corridor led to a heavy oak door, which in turn opened onto a secluded balcony. It was a narrow space offering a view of the city lights shimmering in the distance, a stark contrast to the stifling opulence of the ballroom. A gust of cool night air, fresh and clean, hit her face as she pushed the door open, a welcome shock to her heated skin. She stumbled out, almost tripping on the threshold, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere inside. The cool air tasted like salvation, but it did little to quell the rising tide of panic. She walked to the railing, her hands gripping the cold metal, her knuckles white. The city below sprawled out, a glittering tapestry of indifference. She leaned over, taking deep, ragged gulps of air, her chest heaving with the effort. Her heart pounded erratically, a wild bird trapped within her ribs, threatening to burst free. The first tendrils of panic, cold and relentless, coiled around her, tightening their grip with every gasping breath. Her breath hitched, a jagged, desperate sound tearing through her throat. The cool night air, meant to offer solace, instead pressed against her lungs, suffocating her. Her fingers, usually graceful, curled into tight, white-knuckled fists around the cold stone railing. The city lights below, once a sparkling tapestry, now seemed to merge into a dizzying vortex, threatening to pull her down into their endless shimmer. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, each beat a painful thud echoing in her ears. A film of sweat coated her skin, clammy and cold, despite the warmth of the evening. She tried to swallow, but her throat felt constricted, dry and tight, as if she had swallowed a handful of sand. The elegant gown, a symbol of the life she was supposed to embody, now felt like a heavy shroud, binding her, restricting her every move. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, blurring the already distorted view. But they refused to fall, trapped by the sheer force of her terror. This is it, she thought, a frantic whisper inside her mind. I'm going to unravel right here. Her knees threatened to buckle, a weakness spreading through her limbs, turning her muscles to jelly. The world tilted precariously, and she squeezed her eyes shut, wishing for oblivion, for the darkness to consume her entirely. She needed air, more than anything, but each gasping inhale felt like drawing in nothing but emptiness. Her vision swam, the edges of her sight darkening, a tunnel narrowing around her. She swayed, losing her footing for a moment, her body a puppet with severed strings. A small, desperate moan escaped her lips, a sound she barely recognized as her own. The fear was a living thing, a predator with icy claws clutching at her very core. She felt utterly exposed, vulnerable, wishing the sprawling mansion would simply swallow her whole. A gentle touch on her arm made her jump, a sharp, involuntary gasp escaping her lips. Eleanor's eyes flew open, wide and startled, meeting the calm, steady gaze of Grace Holloway. Grace, her housekeeper, stood there in a quiet presence, her face etched with a familiar concern that Eleanor rarely saw mirrored in anyone else. There was no judgment in Grace's eyes, only a deep, unwavering empathy. Grace's hand, warm and firm, rested on Eleanor's trembling arm, a small anchor in her swirling chaos. Eleanor? Grace's voice was a soft murmur, barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the roaring in Eleanor's ears. You are safe. Just breathe with me now. Grace began to breathe slowly, deeply, her chest rising and falling in a measured rhythm. Eleanor watched her, mesmerized by the simple, steady movement. She tried to imitate it, a shallow, ragged attempt that only made her cough. I cannot. Eleanor managed to gasp, the words raw and strained. I cannot breathe, Grace. It is too much. Her throat tightened again, a fresh wave of panic threatening to overwhelm her. Grace's grip remained firm, a quiet reassurance. She led Eleanor gently away from the railing, guiding her to a small, cushioned bench tucked into a corner of the balcony, away from the direct view of the city. The cool stone of the bench offered a faint comfort against Eleanor's burning skin. Grace sat beside her, not too close, but close enough for Eleanor to feel the warmth radiating from here. Just focus on my voice, dear, Grace instructed softly, her tone soothing. And breathe. Eleanor pressed her palms against her temples, trying to still the frantic thoughts racing through her mind, each one a sharp, stinging accusation. Why am I like this? Why can't I just be normal? She felt foolish, weak, a burden. Yet in Grace's presence, the crushing weight of her isolation seemed to lessen, if only by a fraction. Grace pulled a delicate silk handkerchief from her pocket, offering it to Eleanor. Its subtle lavender scent was a momentary distraction from the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. Eleanor took it, dabbing at her clammy forehead, her hand still trembling. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by Eleanor's ragged breaths and the distant hum of the city. It was not an awkward silence, but one filled with unspoken understanding, a rare luxury in Eleanor's life. Grace's gaze remained fixed on her, patient and kind, a silent invitation to speak. I feel, trapped, Eleanor finally whispered, the words forcing their way out, fragmented and raw, like the walls are closing in. Every day is the same, just waiting. Her voice broke, a small pathetic sound. Waiting for what, Eleanor? Grace asked, her voice still soft, encouraging. Eleanor shook her head, burying her face in her hands. I do not know, for something to change, perhaps. Or for it all to just end. A shudder ran through her body, a wave of despair washing over her. The silence, she continued, her voice muffled. It is the worst. This huge house, and I am utterly alone, always alone. Tears finally welled up, hot and stinging, tracing paths through the faint powder on her cheeks. They were tears of exhaustion, of profound loneliness, of a hope that had withered long ago. Grace reached out, gently rubbing Eleanor's back in slow, comforting circles. It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of Eleanor's pain. It was a touch Eleanor craved, one she had not received in so long, a warmth that seemed to seep into her very bones. She leaned into it, a small, involuntary sigh escaping her. He never comes home, Eleanor murmured, her voice laced with a bitterness that surprised even herself. Or when he does, he is a ghost, a polite stranger. She lifted her head, her blue eyes, usually so distant, now filled with a desperate intensity. I am just furniture to him, Grace, another expensive acquisition for his collection. The realization, though long-standing, felt fresh and searing in its clarity. Grace listened, her expression unchanging, her eyes reflecting the quiet sorrow of someone who had witnessed this story play out many times before. She did not offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She simply offered her presence, her unwavering attention, a sanctuary in Eleanor's storm. He was supposed to be different, Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger with the surge of pain. He was supposed to see me, to truly see me. She gripped the handkerchief, twisting the delicate fabric. But he never did, not past the surface. The confession hung in the air, a heavy, tangible thing between them. Grace reached for Eleanor's hand, her fingers gently closing around Eleanor's trembling ones. The warmth was grounding, real. The sudden jarring ring of her phone shattered the fragile peace. Eleanor flinched, pulling her hand away from Grace. The sudden noise a cruel intrusion. The screen glowed with Dominic's name, a stark white against the darkness. Her heart, which had begun to slow its frantic rhythm, lurched again. A flicker of hope, foolish and persistent, sparked within her. Maybe he knows. Maybe he sensed something. She snatched the phone, her fingers fumbling with the slick glass. Dominic? She managed, her voice still hoarse, a hopeful question in its tone. His voice, when it came, was crisp, composed, utterly devoid of warmth. Eleanor, Just calling to let you know I will not be returning to the estate tonight. I am at the penthouse. Some unexpected business." He spoke quickly, his words clipped, a practiced detachment in his tone. There was no inquiry about her evening, no hint of concern for her well-being. It was a mere logistical update, delivered with the efficiency of a busy executive. Eleanor's nascent hope shriveled, dying instantly. She wanted to tell him, to pour out the fear, the loneliness, the suffocating panic that had just consumed her. She wanted him to hear her, to understand the depth of her despair. "Dominic, I was not feeling well," she began, her voice small, tentative, desperate to find a crack in his carefully constructed indifference. "I had an episode." She paused, waiting, holding her breath, praying for a flicker of something, anything. A question, a sigh, a moment of silence even. But there was only the faint static of the connection, and then his voice again, cool and dismissive. "Yes, well, try to get some rest, Eleanor. I am rather occupied here. We can discuss it in the morning." His tone implied that it was a minor inconvenience, an interruption to his important affairs. He made no effort to elicit further details, no pause to allow her to explain. The words felt like an invisible wall, erected between them, higher and more impenetrable than ever before. "But Dominic," she tried again, a note of desperation creeping into her voice, "I really—" Her sentence was cut short, abruptly. "I must go, Eleanor. Things to attend to." The click of the line going dead echoed in the silent night. A final definitive severing. He had not even waited for her to finish. He had simply hung up, his important affairs taking absolute precedence over her distress, over her very existence. The receiver felt heavy in her hand, suddenly cold, a dead weight. She stared at the blank screen, the disconnected call a brutal testament to his indifference. Grace, who had watched the brief exchange with quiet sorrow, gently placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder again. Eleanor felt the weight of Grace's empathy, and it only intensified her own pain. The knowledge that Grace understood, that she had witnessed this cold dismissal, added another layer to her humiliation. She felt foolish for even trying, for daring to believe, even for a fleeting moment, that he might care. The tears, which had momentarily subsided, now flowed freely, hot and bitter, blurring her vision once more. She did not bother to wipe them away. What was the point? Dominic's detached voice still rang in her ears, a chilling echo of his disregard. "Things to attend to," he had said. She knew what those things likely were. The whispers from the gala, the hushed rumors of a new lady friend, swirled in her mind, coalescing into a sharp, painful image. She saw him laughing, surrounded by light, perhaps with another woman, while she sat alone in the vast, silent mansion, gasping for air, clutching at a stone railing. The contrast was a physical blow, a crushing weight in her chest. Her fingers tightened around her phone, the cold metal a stark reminder of her solitude. She scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over Dominic's name. A frantic, desperate thought began to form in her mind, a raw, primal cry for help that she knew she should not send. It was a plea, simple and stark, devoid of explanation or nuance, a last-ditch effort to puncture his impenetrable wall of indifference. She envisioned the two letters, stark against the bright screen, a final, desperate message. SOS. The thought pulsed in her mind, a frantic, insistent rhythm. Her hand, still trembling slightly, hovered over the message's icon, her heart pounding with a strange mix of terror and a foolish, fleeting hope. She knew deep down that it would change nothing. He would see it, perhaps, or perhaps he would not. But even if he did, what would it matter? His dismissive tone, his abrupt hang-up, already provided the answer. Yet the urge was overpowering, a desperate need to send something, anything, into the void. To prove, if only to herself, that she had tried. The two letters, small and insignificant, held the weight of her entire crumbling world. The dining room air felt heavy, tasting of stale coffee and unspoken resentments. Eleanor had woken with a knot in her stomach, Dominic's detached voice a cold presence in her mind. She found him at the breakfast table, his dark eyes fixed on a tablet. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, but seemed to avoid her side of the room. "Dominic," she began, her voice a thin tremor. He did not look up immediately. Grace's porcelain clinking was the only sound. Eleanor gripped her warm ceramic mug, a small comfort against the chill seeping into her bones. She needed him to truly see her. He finally lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable, a mask she had learned to dread. "Eleanor," he acknowledged, his tone flat. "Is there something urgent you needed?" He offered no invitation to sit. This felt like a physical blow, a dismissal before she spoke. She swallowed, words thick with pain. "I haven't been well, Dominic," she whispered. "Last night at the gala, I felt like I couldn't breathe." She searched his face for concern, for the man she once believed she married. His eyes held only distant observation, as if she were a minor character in a mildly irritating story. "The gala," he repeated, one eyebrow arching. "Yes, I saw you leave rather abruptly. Senator Davies was just about to finalize the deal." His concern was not for her, but for his disrupted evening. The realization landed with a dull thud, stealing her breath. He saw her as an extension of his status, not a person in distress. "It wasn't a matter of choice," she pressed, a desperate edge in her voice. Panic flared. "I felt truly unwell. I needed you, Dominic." The raw truth of her vulnerability hung in the air. His expensive cologne now felt cloying. He set his tablet down with a soft click, giving her his full, cold attention. "Eleanor, we've discussed this before." His voice was calm, controlled, yet held an impatience that made her flinch. "You have a tendency to dramatize things. There is no need for such emotional theatrics. You are perfectly healthy." He waved a dismissive hand. Her blood ran cold. That phrase, casually delivered, reduced her terror to a mere performance. A bitter taste filled her mouth. Tears pricked her eyes, but she willed them back, refusing him the satisfaction. "It's not theatrics," she argued, her voice firmer. "It's real. I feel trapped, Dominic, alone in this enormous house. You are never here. When you are distant." She spread her hands, indicating the vast empty space. The marble floor felt cold beneath her slippers, anchoring her to her desolate reality. Dominic leaned back, his dark suit impeccable. "Eleanor, you want for nothing. This estate, your lifestyle, is more than most could dream of. You have staff, security, all luxuries. What precisely are you trapped from?" He spoke like a man explaining finances to a child, utterly devoid of empathy. His words twisted the knife of her loneliness. "I want a husband," she whispered, the truth escaping. "I want to feel like I matter, like I am seen." Her gaze pleaded, a last attempt to bridge the chasm. The fragile hope she nurtured began to fray under his indifference. He sighed, a barely audible puff that resonated like thunder. "You are seen, Eleanor. You are the lady of this house, my wife. You fulfill your role, but I cannot indulge in these emotional demands. My work is demanding. I do not have the luxury of dwelling on such trivialities." He stood, ending their conversation. "Trivialities?" The word escaped, laced with bitter disbelief. He was already turning away, his attention shifting to financial papers. He had dismissed her, her pain, her very being, as trivial. The confrontation, meant to be a bridge, became another wall. Her breath hitched, a silent sob catching. Dominic paused at the doorway. "I will be in my study. Do not disturb me unless absolutely necessary." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the cavernous dining room. His cologne faded, replaced by her despair. The silence was oppressive, a heavy blanket. Eleanor remained, hands gripping the cold mug. The confrontation confirmed her worst fears. He truly did not care. He saw her only as an obligation. Her hope shattered into sharp pieces. Later that afternoon, a restless energy pulled Eleanor through the quiet halls. The estate, usually a comfort, now felt like a gilded cage. She drifted towards Dominic's study, a forbidden territory, a sanctuary of his secrets. A vague curiosity drew her in, a need for connection. The room was dimly lit, drapes drawn. The air was thick with aged leather, pipe tobacco, and a faint, sweet, unfamiliar perfume. Eleanor paused, instantly on alert. The scent was not hers, nor Grace's. It was distinctly feminine, delicate, alien to Dominic's domain. Cold dread coiled in her stomach. She moved through the room, her footsteps muffled. Her eyes scanned the shelves, the desk, the armchair. Half hidden beneath a velvet cushion, she saw a flash of pale, shimmering fabric. Her breath caught. Her heart pounded frantically. She reached out a trembling hand, brushing the soft silk. It was a scarf, delicate, gossamer, the color of moonlight, edged with lace. It was not hers. She had never owned anything so overtly feminine. Eleanor slowly drew it out, holding it to the faint light. The silk shimmered. The unfamiliar perfume intensified, clinging to the fabric. It was sweet, heady, vibrant, seductive, completely unlike her own fragrance. This was the scent of another woman, one who had been here in Dominic's intimate space. Nausea washed over her, and her face drained. Her hands trembled. This was it. Not a rumor, but undeniable proof. The cold scarf, imbued with infidelity, burned in her hands. Her head swam with crushing realization. She dropped the scarf like a burning coal, watching it drift to the floor. The sight of it, a damning testament to his betrayal, made her stomach churn. Her mind raced. The late nights, the absences, his dismissive attitude, it all clicked with horrifying clarity. Eleanor pressed her palms against her temples. He had not only been indifferent to her suffering, he had actively betrayed her. While she struggled, he was here, with another woman. The betrayal was so deep, so absolute, it stole the very air from her lungs. A coldness spread through her veins. She sank onto the edge of the sofa, the rich fabric rough. The room, once a symbol of his power, now felt tainted, a stage for deceit. The opulent surroundings, the silence, became instruments of her torture. The afternoon bled into evening. Eleanor remained in suspended disbelief. The scarf burned into her mind. She tried to deny it, to rationalize, but the perfume, its hidden placement, and the gut-wrenching certainty in her heart told her otherwise. Her anxiety built, a relentless tide. The world outside the study shrank, walls closing in. Every shadow held a sinister shape. A familiar constriction tightened her chest, making each breath shallow. She wandered to her bedroom, the grand, empty space now utterly oppressive. The luxury mocked her, a gilded cage. The bed, usually a sanctuary, felt cold and vast. A lonely island. Sleep refused. Her mind replayed every cold glance, every dismissive word from Dominic, gaining new meaning in the harsh light of this betrayal. The scarf, the perfume, his casual cruelty, it merged into a suffocating tapestry of pain. She rose, body heavy, legs disconnected. She paced, a restless rhythm matching her frantic heart. Each step echoed her confinement. The walls seemed to loom closer. The air grew thick, making full breaths difficult. She pressed her palms against the cool window pane, looking into the impenetrable darkness of the estate. The high walls, security, distance, it all created a perfect prison. A metallic taste coated her tongue. Her hands trembled, her body vibrating. She felt lightheaded, dizzy. Her breathing grew shallow, ragged, each inhale a struggle. The thought of the scarf, of Dominic with another woman, fueled her panic. She walked from one end of the room to the other, her bare feet silent. The night's silence was broken only by her heart and strained breathing. A wave of intense, primal fear washed over her. She was alone, utterly facing a shattered world. The hours dragged, each minute an eternity. She clutched her chest, trying to steady the wild thumping. Her head ached, muscles tensed. Cold sweat slicked her skin. The first gray light appeared on the horizon, a cruel promise. As the world slowly awakened, Eleanor's strength gave out. Her legs buckled. She stumbled toward the bed, vision blurring, body screaming for release. She collapsed onto the mattress, a crushing weight pressing the last air from her lungs. Her breathing became shallow and ragged, each gasp a desperate attempt to cling to consciousness. The air itself seemed to shrink, pressing down on Eleanor's chest until each breath became a desperate, burning gasp. Her lungs fought against an invisible weight, a silent, crushing force that stole the oxygen from the opulent room. The world around her began to sway. the elaborate patterns on the ceiling swirling into a dizzying vortex of gold and ivory. Her vision blurred, the edges of the room darkening, closing in like a suffocating shroud. She clutched at the silken sheets, her fingers digging deep into the cool fabric, seeking purchase against the terrifying slide into oblivion. A primal fear seized her, tightening its icy grip around her throat. She felt a tremor start in her knees, a subtle vibration that quickly spread through her entire body. Her limbs began to shake uncontrollably, a violent shiver that had nothing to do with cold. It was an internal earthquake, rattling her bones and tearing at her composure. Each muscle rebelled, twitching and spasming, refusing to obey her will. The tremor intensified, turning into a convulsion that made her teeth chatter audibly. A cold sweat plastered her delicate hair to her forehead, trickling down her temples, leaving a chilling trail against her hot skin. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat signaling impending doom. It felt as if it would burst from her chest, a wild, untamed thing trying to escape its cage. She could hear the rapid, erratic thumping in her ears, drowning out every other sound, amplifying the terror. She was drowning, not in water, but in the overwhelming sensation of her own body betraying her. The intricate details of her bedroom, usually a source of quiet comfort, now seemed grotesque and menacing. The heavy velvet drapes became dark, impenetrable walls. The antique furniture loomed like silent, disapproving spectators. She needed to hold on to something, anything, to ground herself. Her eyes darted wildly, unfocused, searching for an anchor in the swirling chaos. The bedside table, usually so neat and orderly, appeared miles away, an impossible distance to cross. Her phone lay there, a sleek rectangle of metal and glass, a potential bridge back to reality. It represented connection, a voice, a hand reaching out. It was her only hope in this suffocating darkness. Every ounce of her failing strength was channeled into a single, desperate intention: reach the phone. Her hand, trembling violently, lifted from the bed, floating like a disembodied thing. It felt heavy, weighted with lead, refusing to obey the urgent commands from her terrified mind. She stretched, her arm feeling impossibly long and weak, the tips of her fingers barely brushing the cold surface of the marble table. The distance felt insurmountable, each millimeter an agonizing struggle. A choked sob escaped her lips, a sound thin and reedy in the oppressive silence. She was alone, utterly and completely, in this gilded cage that had become her personal hell. The thought pierced through the fog of panic, sharpening her resolve. She had to fight. She had to reach out. There was no one else. Dominic was gone, as always, leaving her to face her demons in solitude. But perhaps, just perhaps, he would respond to this. This was different. This was critical. With a superhuman effort, she pushed herself up, her body protesting with every strained muscle. Her head swam, the room tilting violently. She swayed precariously, her legs threatening to buckle beneath her. She was on her knees somehow beside the bed, her trembling hand finally closing around the smooth, cold casing of her phone. It felt like a heavy stone, too large for her grip. Her fingers, slick with sweat, struggled to hold it steady. She fumbled with the screen, the bright light assaulting her dilated pupils. It was an alien device in her shaking grasp. Her thumbs, uncooperative and clumsy, struggled to unlock it. The symbols on the screen danced before her eyes, a meaningless jumble. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear her vision, trying to force her chaotic mind to focus. Breathe, she told herself, but the instruction felt hollow, impossible. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the phone unlocked. The familiar interface swam into view, a fleeting moment of clarity. She navigated instinctively to the messaging app, her fingers moving with a terrifying slowness, each tap a monumental effort. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts. What could she say? How could she convey the sheer, unadulterated terror consuming her? Words failed her. They seemed insignificant, pointless, in the face of this overwhelming attack. Her breathing became shallower, more ragged. Her chest burned with a fierce, persistent pain, a crushing weight that threatened to steal her last breath. She was suffocating. She truly believed it. This was how it ended, alone in this vast, silent room. A single desperate word formed in her mind, a cry for help that transcended language, a universal signal of distress. SOS. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, shaking so violently she could barely aim. Each letter was a victory, a monumental achievement. S, then O, then S. Three simple letters, yet they carried the entire weight of her desperation, her fear, her profound loneliness. She stared at the stark white text against the dark screen, a tiny beacon of hope in her personal abyss. Her last hope. A fresh wave of dizziness washed over her, threatening to pull her back into the swirling darkness. She fought it, gritting her teeth, her jaw aching with the effort. She had to send it. She had to. This was her last resort, her final plea to the man who was supposed to be her protector, her husband, the one person who was supposed to care. With one final monumental surge of energy, she pressed the send button. The screen flickered, briefly displaying the word sent. A profound exhaustion immediately washed over her, draining the last vestiges of her strength. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the panic attack now receded, leaving her body limp and unresponsive. The phone, once a lifeline, now felt impossibly heavy in her weakening grip. It slipped from her fingers, clattering softly onto the thick Persian rug beside her bed. She barely registered the sound. Her body, no longer able to support itself, gave way. She collapsed fully onto the floor, a heap of trembling limbs and gasping breaths. Her cheek pressed against the cool, soft wool of the rug, a small comfort in the vastness of her suffering. Her eyes, and unfocused, stared blankly at the underside of the bed frame, seeing nothing. Each breath was a struggle, a guttural sound torn from her throat. She lay there, utterly spent, her chest heaving, awaiting a response that might save her. The city lights glittered below, a sprawling tapestry of diamonds scattered across dark velvet, each sparkle a distant, unfeeling eye. Inside the sleek city penthouse, a different kind of brilliance gleamed. Dominic Thorne leaned back on the plush, low-slung sofa, a crystal glass of amber liquid cool in his hand. Across from him, Chloe Davis laughed, the sound bright and sharp, like the clinking of ice in a cocktail. Her red dress, a whisper of silk, caught the ambient glow from the city outside, making her skin seem to shimmer. Dominic watched her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. This space, this moment, felt like his true domain. Here, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low thrum of ambition. It was a world entirely separate from the cavernous, quiet rooms of the Thorne estate, a world free from the subtle weight of responsibility and the suffocating silence that Eleanor often carried with her. Here he was simply Dominic, a man enjoying the spoils of his own making, untethered and unburdened. Chloe reached across the glass coffee table, her fingers brushing his arm lightly, a gesture both possessive and playful. "You look like you're plotting something magnificent," she murmured, her voice a low purr that always found its mark. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, reflected the city's glow. She understood him, or at least she understood the part of him he chose to present in this opulent, elevated sanctuary. She never asked for too much, never demanded the depths he simply did not possess. That was her allure, a sophisticated absence of expectation. Dominic took a slow sip of his drink, the burning liquid of familiar comfort. "Always, Chloe," he responded, his voice deep and smooth, betraying nothing. He enjoyed this dance, the subtle power play, the effortless ease of their connection. It was a stark contrast to the strained silences and fragile emotional landscape that defined his life at the estate. There, every interaction felt like a negotiation, a performance for an audience of one, a deeply unhappy one at that. A faint vibration started on the glass coffee table, pulling his gaze downward. His phone, a dark, sleek rectangle, pulsed with an incoming message. The screen lit up, revealing the name Eleanor, and beneath it, two stark capital letters, SOS. The letters seemed to jump out, a sudden dissonant clang in the harmonious hum of the penthouse. Dominic's jaw tightened, the faint smile vanishing from his face. A flash of annoyance, sharp and immediate, crossed his features. It was an intrusion, a clumsy, ill-timed plea that threatened to shatter the carefully constructed peace of his evening. He had left the estate, left her, specifically to escape this very atmosphere of need and unspoken demand. He wanted to forget the pale face, the trembling hands, the silent accusations in her eyes. Chloe, ever perceptive, noticed the shift in his demeanor. Her own smile faltered slightly as she spun his gaze to the phone. She had heard the name Eleanor before, understood its implications, but never allowed it to truly penetrate the bubble they built around themselves. She saw the message, the stark SOS, but her expression remained carefully neutral, a subtle question in her eyes. She knew when to push and when to simply observe. Dominic's thumb hovered over the screen. He could feel the faint vibration against the glass. He knew with a chilling certainty what Eleanor's message signified. It was another panic attack, another descent into the abyss she seemed to inhabit with increasing frequency. He had seen it before, countless times, each instance chipping away at his patience, hardening his resolve. He saw it not as a genuine cry for help, but as a manipulative tactic, a desperate bid for his attention, his presence. It was a weight, a burden, pulling him back into a world he actively sought to escape. He remembered the silk scarf, Eleanor's reaction when she found it, the quiet storm that had brewed in her eyes. He had dismissed it then, just as he dismissed her now. Her distress felt like an inconvenience, a disruption to his carefully ordered existence, an irritating glitch in the otherwise smooth machinery of his life. He had provided her with every luxury, every material comfort a woman could desire. What more could she possibly want? His presence, his emotional engagement, felt like a currency he simply did not have to spare, or perhaps did not wish to spend on her. His gaze flickered from the phone to Chloe, then back to the screen. The letters SOS seemed to mock him, demanding something he was unwilling to give. He felt a surge of resentment. How dare she interrupt this? How dare she attempt to drag him back into her misery, into the suffocating reality of their crumbling marriage, when he was finally experiencing a moment of genuine, unfettered lightness? He had earned this, he told himself. He worked tirelessly, built an empire, and this was his reward, his fleeting respite. With a dismissive scoff, a sound barely audible, he reached out. His fingers, long and strong, closed around the phone. He pressed a button, not to open the message, not to call back, but to silence the incessant vibration. The screen went dark, the name Eleanor, and her desperate plea vanishing into the cold glass. Then, with a deliberate, almost theatrical gesture, he flipped the phone over, placing it face down on the table. The smooth, cool back of the device stared up at the ceiling, a silent tomb for Eleanor's cry. A subtle tension eased from his shoulders. The interruption was over. The outside world, with its demands and its disappointments, was once again banished. He looked at Chloe, a cold smile slowly returning to his lips, a carefully constructed mask of composure. He raised his glass, clinking it gently against hers. The sound was crisp, final. "Where were we?" he asked, his voice smooth, as if nothing had happened, as if no desperate message had ever arrived. He turned his full attention back to Chloe, his dark eyes intense, completely engaged with her and the glittering city beyond. Eleanor's unanswered message lay forgotten on the table, a silent testament to his profound, devastating abandonment, its desperate plea unheard, unacknowledged, unmourned. The world slowly bled back into Eleanor's awareness, a dull ache throbbing behind her eyes, a heavy pulse echoing in her temples. Her tongue felt thick and dry, a gritty film coating the inside of her mouth, like fine sand caught between her teeth. She lay crumpled on the cold, unforgiving marble floor, the sharp chill seeping into her bones through the thin, insubstantial silk of her nightgown. Each muscle protested with a deep, weary complaint as she stirred, a testament to the night's long and silent battle against a terror she could not name. The air in the opulent bedroom hung stale and heavy, carrying the metallic tang of her own fear, a bitter, lingering scent that clung to the rich fabrics. A faint sliver of pre-dawn light struggled through the heavy, velvet drapes, painting the vast room in muted shades of gray and lavender. Her vision slowly sharpened, the intricate, swirling patterns of the ancient Persian rug beneath her becoming terrifyingly clear, each thread distinct. Each breath still felt shallow, a tight, invisible band constricting her chest, squeezing the very air from her lungs. The frantic, terrifying palpitations of hours ago had subsided, leaving behind only a dull, persistent thrum, a hollow beat against her ribs. She swallowed hard, the effort a dry rasp, sending a jolt of pain down her throat that made her wince. She could feel the lingering tremor in her fingertips. Her fingers brushed against something cool and smooth on the floor beside her head, a familiar shape in the dimness. It was her phone, a small dark rectangle of technology that had felt like her last desperate anchor in a raging, unseen storm. A faint, involuntary tremor ran through her hand as she reached for it, her fingers clumsy and unresponsive, like limbs made of lead. The screen was dark, a blank slate that offered no comfort, no answers, only the polished void of her own despair. She pressed the side button, and the display flickered to life with an almost violent burst of white light, the harsh glow momentarily stinging her eyes, making them water. A gasp escaped her lips, unheard in the silence. The screen showed the message she had sent, stark and accusing in the pale, unforgiving light. Two letters, simple, raw, and desperate. SOS. Below it, the timestamp, a cold clinical record of her utter collapse, marking the moment her world fractured. It read 3 hours ago, and then the crushing silence of the message details. Sent. There was no comforting, delivered notification, no reassuring, read receipt. No reply, just the stark, unvarnished truth of its fate, a digital ghost of her plea hanging there, unacknowledged, unheard, lost in the vastness. Her chest tightened again. A slow, chilling comprehension began to spread through her, colder and more profound than the marble beneath her cheek, seeping into her very marrow. It was not merely that he had been busy, perhaps caught in an important meeting. It was not that he had simply missed it, lost in the myriad notifications of his own busy life. No, the message had been sent 4 long hours ago, cast out into the vast, indifferent expanse of the night. He had not responded. He had not checked. He had not cared. The knowledge settled deep within her, heavy and unyielding, like a massive stone dropped into the deepest, darkest well, sending ripples of pure despair outward. She traced the letters SOS with her thumb, feeling the smooth, cold glass of the screen beneath her skin, the tiny imperfections in the tempered surface. Her own desperate cry, hurled into an empty void, had simply vanished without a trace, without a single ripple. A profound loneliness, deeper than any she had ever known, began to envelop her, pressing in from all sides. It was not the familiar, aching loneliness of his frequent absences, or the quiet despair of their empty dinners, eaten in silence across a vast table. This was the raw, brutal truth that when she was truly at her weakest, truly believed she was drowning, fighting for air, he had not even extended a hand to pull her up. He had not even seen her. The bitter truth felt like a physical blow. Her breath hitched in her throat, a ragged sound that broke the silence, but no tears came. The well of sorrow felt utterly dry, emptied by the sheer, overwhelming scale of this abandonment. It was a betrayal that transcended all the casual infidelities, all the dismissive words, the small cruelties. This was a betrayal of her very being, a declaration that her pain, her fear, her panic meant absolutely nothing to him. She was expendable, a trivial footnote in his grand, self-serving narrative, easily forgotten, easily discarded. The thought was a shard of ice in her heart. The realization did not arrive as a sudden, sharp stab, a single piercing wound, but as a slow, creeping frost, numbing her from the inside out, turning her blood to ice. All the small slights, the averted gazes, the empty promises whispered in the dark, the cold formality of their interactions, the deliberate distance he kept, they all coalesced into one undeniable, crushing truth. He had never loved her. He had never truly seen her, not the real Eleanor, not the woman beneath the surface. She was merely an accessory, a beautiful, quiet fixture in his opulent life, easily ignored, easily replaced by the next distraction. She pushed herself up, her limbs stiff and protesting, every joint aching, but a strange, crystalline resolve was beginning to form deep within her. The physical pain was a distant echo now, a dull background hum compared to the stark, emotional void that now consumed her. The panic attack had broken something inside her, Yes, shattered fragile illusions, but in its place something new, something hard and unyielding, was taking root. She was alone, truly irrevocably alone, cast adrift. And in that terrifying solitude, a tiny defiant spark, red and fiercely hot, began to glow in the deepest part of her being. The thin silk nightgown felt flimsy, utterly insufficient against the chill that seemed to emanate not from the cavernous room but from her own core, from the hollow space within her chest. She stood unsteadily, her legs trembling slightly beneath her, but her gaze was fixed. Her eyes, still slightly puffy from the long strain of the night, held a new unsettling clarity, sharper than anything she had ever known. She looked around the cavernous room, the gilded furniture gleaming dully in the nascent light, the heavy drapes shrouding the windows, the priceless artwork on the walls. This was her gilded cage, a prison built of immense wealth and profound indifference. He had locked her in, secured the door, and then he had simply walked away, leaving her to suffocate in the silence. A bitter taste filled her mouth, sharper than any despair, a metallic tang like old blood. It was the taste of wasted years, of unfulfilled hopes, of a life lived in quiet desperation, shrinking smaller and smaller. But alongside of it, a strange, invigorating metallic tang, like the scent of impending change, or perhaps freedom. She took a slow, deliberate step, then another, the marble cold beneath her bare feet, a chilling kiss. Her path led her towards the far wall, where a magnificent antique mirror, framed in intricately carved mahogany, dominated the space, reflecting the dim light back at her. She moved with a new kind of purpose, not hurried, not frantic, but with a quiet, unshakable intent that seemed to anchor her to the floor. The air still felt heavy, laden with unspoken things, but now it was a canvas for her own emerging will, not a suffocating shroud. As she approached the mirror, her reflection slowly materialized, emerging from the shadows. The woman staring back was pale, her light brown hair disheveled, falling across her face in tangled strands, her delicate frame looking impossibly fragile and utterly exhausted. But as she drew closer, another detail came into sharp focus, demanding her attention. Her blue eyes, usually soft and shadowed with a melancholic, almost pleading gaze, were profoundly different now. The despair was gone, vanished, replaced by something colder, harder, like polished stone. There was no trace of the frantic fear that had gripped her just hours before, no lingering plea for rescue, no desperate cry for help. Instead, her pupils seemed to have darkened, expanded, her gaze piercing, unwavering, meeting her own reflection with a shocking intensity. It was the look of someone who had seen the absolute abyss of their isolation, stared into its terrifying depths, and found not more despair, but a terrible burning truth. She was looking at a stranger, a woman whose face was undeniably hers, but whose soul had just been irrevocably altered, forged in the fires of abandonment. Her eyes now held a steely, unfamiliar glint of absolute determination. The ornate gilded mirror in her dressing room no longer reflected a trapped woman. Instead, Eleanor saw an observer, a stranger with eyes sharpened by a cold, unwavering focus. The profound silence of the Thorne estate, once a suffocating blanket, now became a canvas for her heightened senses. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant hum of the security system, every muted clink from the kitchen staff painted a map of the house, a map she had never truly seen before. This fortress, designed to keep the world out, felt like a cage ready for its lock to be picked from the inside. She began to trace Dominic's movements with an almost surgical precision. His familiar, heavy footsteps on the marble stairs were no longer just a sign of his presence, but an indication of his schedule. The faint scent of his expensive cologne lingering in the air told her how recently he had passed a doorway. She learned the precise times the security patrols shifted their routes, the brief windows when certain cameras might have a blind spot, the moments the kitchen staff were most engrossed in their work. The house had always been a series of closed doors and grand, empty spaces, but now it was a labyrinth, and Eleanor was learning its secrets. Her internal monologue was a steady, quiet hum, devoid of the panic that once consumed her. "He thinks I am broken," she mused, observing Dominic from a distance as he took a call in his study, his voice a low, dismissive murmur. He thinks I am fragile, a decorative piece. A faint, bitter smile touched her lips. She had been fragile, yes, but that weakness had calcified into something hard and unyielding. The sting of his betrayal, the deliberate neglect of her cry for help, had cauterized the wound of her love, leaving behind a cold, clear space where a plan could grow. The air in the mansion, usually thick with the scent of polished wood and old money, now carried a faint, almost imperceptible tang of fear. A fear that was her own, but also a weapon she was learning to wield. She noticed how the shadows stretched longer in the late afternoon, swallowing corners and hallways, creating perfect pockets of invisibility. The drone of the air conditioning unit, a constant backdrop to her life, now seemed to mask softer sounds, whispers, footsteps. She was learning to hear what was not meant to be heard, to see what was not meant to be seen. Dominic, absorbed in his world of power and control, remained utterly oblivious. His occasional fleeting glances at her held the same detached assessment he reserved for a painting on the wall. He saw the elegant facade, the quiet wife, and never once looked for the churning gears beneath. This blindness was his greatest vulnerability and Eleanor's growing strength. Each time he spoke to her with that dismissive tone, each time he moved through the house with his air of unquestioned authority, her resolve hardened. She was no longer just a wife. She was an architect of her own escape, building her future brick by silent brick. Her days transitioned into a meticulous routine of observation and stealthy preparation. She started by hoarding small amounts of a few $100s at a time, drawn from the allowance Dominic provided for household expenses. She was careful, always leaving enough to avoid suspicion, scattering the withdrawals over weeks, making them seem like ordinary expenditures for incidental household needs. The crisp banknotes felt foreign in her hand, a tangible symbol of independence. She would slip them into the lining of an old, forgotten handbag, tucked deep inside a rarely used wardrobe, the fabric muffling the crinkle of the bills. Next came the irreplaceable personal items. Not the extravagant jewelry Dominic had showered her with, which felt tainted and cold, but pieces that carried the warmth of a life before him. A small, tarnished silver locket, a gift from her grandmother, containing a faded photograph of her parents. A worn paperback copy of her favorite novel, its pages softened by countless readings, its margins filled with her youthful scribbles. A single, small, smooth riverstone she had picked up during a childhood vacation, a tangible link to a simpler, happier time. Each item was chosen with a quiet, fierce deliberation, a fragment of her true self she refused to leave behind. She kept these treasures hidden, tucked into a silk pouch, then placed within a hollowed-out book she kept on her bedside table, one she knew Dominic would never touch. The very act of touching these items, feeling their textures, smelling the faint, lingering sense of memory, brought a quiet ache to her chest, but also a surge of determination. They were anchors to the Eleanor she had been, and a promise to the Eleanor she would become. The weight of the pouch in her hands was both a burden and a comfort, a secret kept close to her heart. The process of gathering these items, the careful selection, the quiet stashing, became a ritual. It was a secret language she spoke only to herself, a rebellion whispered in the silent rooms of her gilded prison. The thrill of each small success, each item secured, was a potent antidote to the years of quiet despair. Her fingers, once trembling with anxiety, now moved with a steady purpose, folding a silk scarf around the locket, slipping the book back onto the shelf. The air around her seemed to vibrate with her unspoken intentions, a private, pulsating energy. Grace, ever the keen observer, began to notice the subtle shifts in Eleanor's presence. The housekeeper, who had watched Eleanor slowly recede into a melancholic shell, now perceived a different kind of quietness. It was no longer the heavy silence of resignation, but a stillness that felt watchful, almost coiled. One morning, as Grace poured Eleanor's tea, she saw it in her eyes, a light that had been extinguished for years, a flicker of something sharp and vital. "You seem well, Mrs. Vance," Grace murmured gently, her voice soft as the morning light streaming through the dining room windows. She placed the delicate porcelain cup before Eleanor, the steam rising in a thin spiral. Eleanor looked up, her gaze meeting Grace's. A beat of silence stretched between them, a moment where unspoken understandings hung in the air. Eleanor's usual responses had been polite, distant affirmations of her ongoing malaise. But this time, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "I am simply clearer, Grace," Eleanor replied, her voice soft, but with an underlying current Grace had not heard in a long time. She picked up the teacup, her fingers firm around the delicate handle, a stark contrast to the trembling she had often exhibited. The scent of black tea and lemon filled her senses, grounding her in the present. Grace simply nodded, her kind eyes holding a mixture of curiosity and relief. She had seen the despair, the slow fading of Eleanor's spirit. This new quiet strength, this newfound clarity, was a welcome if mysterious change. She moved about the room, dusting a nearby credenza, her movements quiet and unobtrusive. But her mind was turning over Eleanor's words, the slight lift in her chin, the steady resolve in her posture. She felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere around Eleanor, a tension that was no longer born of fear, but of anticipation. Later that week, Eleanor spent an entire afternoon in her sprawling wardrobe, a room filled with designer gowns and tailored suits, each a reminder of the life she was planning to shed. She ran her hands along the expensive fabrics, each one feeling like a costume she had worn for too long. Deeper within the wardrobe, behind a panel of cedar and beneath a stack of unused hat boxes, she located a small, built-in compartment, a forgotten feature of the old estate. It was perfect. She carefully placed the silk pouch containing her precious memories inside, the weight of the book, the locket, the stone. Then, with a practiced hand, she secured the panel back into place. Inside, she added a worn, leather-bound journal, its pages blank, waiting to be filled with a new story. Her heart thrummed with a forbidden sense of purpose. Eleanor's fingers brushed the worn leather of the journal, a silent pact forged between its blank pages and her burgeoning resolve. The steel in her eyes, born of utter abandonment, felt like a new skin, hard and unwavering. Her breath came in quiet, even measures now, a stark contrast to the ragged gasps that had once defined her days. This new stillness was not peace, but a dangerous calm, the quiet before a storm she herself would unleash. The mansion, once a gilded cage, now felt like a vast, elaborate stage where she played a final, intricate role. The first step, she knew, lay in absolute discretion. She needed a channel, a thread to the outside world that Dominic could not trace, a line of communication beyond his vast network of surveillance. Grace, with her quiet strength and knowing eyes, was the only one she trusted. One afternoon, while Eleanor was arranging flowers in the main hall, Grace approached her, her movements as soft as always. "A friend of mine," Grace began, her voice a low murmur, "has a connection for things that need to stay private." Eleanor paused, a single white rose suspended in her hand, its delicate petals a sharp contrast to the thorns she felt within. She did not need to elaborate, nor did Grace require explanation. Their understanding transcended words, a bond forged in shared silence and unspoken sorrow. Grace knew the suffocating loneliness that had become Eleanor's constant companion, the invisible chains that held her captive. "Tell your friend," Eleanor replied, her voice steady, "that I am interested." Grace nodded, her gaze warm and unwavering, a silent promise exchanged between two women bound by circumstance, yet united in spirit. The following day, a small, nondescript package appeared on Eleanor's bedside table, tucked beneath a pile of freshly laundered linens. Inside, wrapped in soft tissue paper, was a burner phone, its slim black form a stark utilitarian contrast to her usual elegant devices. No brand name, no visible identity, just a tool for a singular, desperate purpose. Its cold plastic felt surprisingly empowering in her palm. That night, Eleanor waited until the mansion was swallowed by its usual deep, echoing silence. The only sounds were the distant hum of the estate's powerful security systems and the faint, rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hall below. She sat upright in her vast bed, the opulent silk sheets a cruel mockery of comfort, and stared at the dark screen of the burner phone. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of both terror and thrilling anticipation. This was it. This was the true beginning of her escape. She pressed the power button, watching the small screen flicker to life. The faint blue glow illuminated her face, casting long dancing shadows on the high ceilings. There was a sense of raw, untamed possibility in her fingertips as she navigated the simple interface. She began her search, typing carefully, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities and dangers. The keywords were simple: remote towns, discreet travel, new identities. Each search result was a small window into a world she had only dreamed of. A world without Dominic, without the crushing weight of his name. The screen offered images of quaint coastal villages, their colorful houses clinging to rugged cliffs, the promise of vast, open oceans stretching to the horizon. She saw small, bustling market towns nestled deep within rolling green hills, far from the polished marble and cold steel of her current reality. The scent of salt and pine seemed to waft from the digital images, a stark contrast to the sterile, expensive perfumes that permeated the Thorne estate. Eleanor imagined the feel of rough, sea-swept air on her skin, the sound of crashing waves drowning out the phantom echoes of Dominic's dismissive voice. She researched methods, her mind surprisingly sharp and analytical. Cash transactions were paramount, untraceable, and swift. Public transport, not the private jets or luxury cars Dominic used, offered anonymity. Every detail, every small piece of information, felt like a brick in the foundation of her new, imagined life. The fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now tempered by a growing, fierce exhilaration. The thought of stepping onto a crowded train, just another face in the blur of humanity, filled her with a potent, almost dizzying sense of freedom. The planning took days bleeding into nights. Each stolen hour was a victory, each discovered piece of information a jewel in her growing treasure of hope. Grace, ever watchful, would leave small, sustaining meals outside Eleanor's door, a silent acknowledgement of the intense, solitary work happening within. The unspoken support from Grace was a lifeline, a gentle anchor in the churning sea of Eleanor's emotional landscape. There was a quiet strength in Grace's eyes, a steady, knowing presence that Eleanor clung to. One evening, Eleanor found herself staring at the antique diamond pendant. It had been a gift from Dominic on their 5th anniversary, a dazzling cluster of perfectly cut stones, cold and heavy against her skin. It was priceless, exquisite, and utterly meaningless. It represented a hollow promise, a gilded cage. Now it was nothing more than a source of capital, a key to unlock her future. Its beauty had always felt oppressive, a symbol of the wealth that had become her prison. She wanted no reminder of him, not even one that sparkled so brightly. She contacted Grace again, the request delivered in the same quiet, almost conspiratorial tone. "I need to sell something," Eleanor stated, her voice devoid of emotion, discreetly and quickly. Grace's eyes met hers and a silent understanding passed between them. There was no judgment, only quiet resolve. The world they lived in, the world Dominic had built, was riddled with shadows and unspoken agreements. Grace knew people, individuals who operated on the fringes, outside the direct glare of Dominic's influence. A few days later, Grace arranged a meeting. Not in the mansion, of course, but in a small, unassuming office above a quiet street in the city, a place Dominic would never dream of entering. Eleanor wore a simple dark dress, her face framed by a wide-brimmed hat, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses. The disguise felt strangely liberating, a taste of the anonymity she craved. She carried the pendant, nestled in a velvet pouch, its weight a physical manifestation of her past. The man Grace introduced her to was slight, with kind, intelligent eyes and hands that moved with practiced precision. He examined the pendant under a jeweler's loupe, his movements meticulous and unhurried. Eleanor watched him, her breath held tight in her chest. Each flicker of light on the diamonds felt like a heartbeat, counting down the moments to her liberation. The silence in the small room was thick, broken only by the faint sounds of city life filtering through the window. He named a price, a sum that made Eleanor's heart leap. It was substantial, more than enough to fund her escape and start anew. The cold, hard reality of the cash he handed her felt foreign, yet profoundly real. She held the thick wad of bills, the crisp paper a tangible symbol of her burgeoning freedom. This money, stained with the memory of a broken marriage, would now be the fuel for her rebirth. It was not tainted, it was purified by her intent. As she left the office, the city air felt different, sharper, cleaner. The anonymity of the bustling street embraced her, offering a solace she had not known in years. She was a ghost walking among the living, invisible and unburdened. The weight of the pendant was gone, replaced by the lighter, more empowering weight of the cash in her bag. She felt a tremor run through her, a mix of triumph and a terrifying realization of the irreversible path she had chosen. There was no turning back now. Meanwhile, Dominic remained utterly oblivious, his world consumed by the intricacies of power and profit. He was embroiled in a high-stakes business deal, a complex acquisition that demanded his full, ruthless attention. His office at the city penthouse was a maelstrom of activity, phone calls echoing, screens flashing with financial data, subordinates scurrying to meet his demands. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and ambition. He spoke in clipped, authoritative tones, his dark eyes fixed on the intricate details of contracts and projections. Eleanor, his wife, was a distant, barely registered thought, a decorative fixture in the vast landscape of his life. Her emotional struggles, her panic attacks, her very existence had become an inconvenience, a distraction from his monumental pursuits. His focus was absolute, a laser beam fixed on the next conquest, the next expansion of his empire. He saw only numbers, leverage, and potential gains. This complete absorption in his world was Eleanor's greatest ally. His arrogance, his self-centered belief that nothing could truly challenge his control, rendered him blind. He would never suspect the quiet, determined rebellion brewing beneath his very roof. The thought of his inevitable shock, the fury that would erupt when he finally realized her absence, brought a flicker of grim satisfaction to Eleanor's face. It would be a small but potent revenge for every dismissive glance, every cruel neglect. Armed with the burner phone, the pishish, and the precise details of her chosen destination, Eleanor made her final preparations. She had chosen Seagrove Cove, a remote coastal town she had discovered in her late-night searches. It was far from the city's reach, far from Dominic's influence, a place where the ocean met the land in a dramatic, untamed embrace. Its isolation was its greatest allure, a promise of peace and anonymity. One brisk morning, she found herself standing at a ticket counter, the fluorescent lights of the train station stark against her face. The air buzzed with the muted symphony of travelers, hurried footsteps, muffled conversations, the rumble of distant trains. She felt a curious blend of apprehension and surging hope. This was a place of departures, of new beginnings, a stark contrast to the stagnant opulence of the Thorne estate. "One way to Seagrove Cove, please," she requested, her voice steady, though her heart pounded a frantic drum. The ticket agent, a young woman with a kind smile, processed the request efficiently. Eleanor watched her fingers move across the keyboard, each click a step closer to her freedom. The small printed ticket felt like a heavy stone in her hand when the agent passed it to her. She clutched the paper, her knuckles white, her breath catching in her throat. The ink on the ticket was a tangible declaration, a physical manifestation of her irreversible decision. Seagrove Cove. A new name, a new life, an unwritten future. The fear was exhilarating, a potent mix with the burgeoning hope that swelled within her chest. The heavy chime of the antique grandfather clock in the foyer echoed through the vast, silent house, announcing the hour of their last supper. Eleanor descended the grand staircase, her hand gliding over the cold, polished banister, each step a deliberate act of control. Her blue gown, a shade darker than her eyes, felt like a shroud, clinging to her form with a luxurious weight. She saw Dominic already seated at the head of the dining table, his dark suit a stark silhouette against the candlelight, his attention fixed on a tablet in his hand. He did not look up when she entered the room. The air in the dining room hung thick with the scent of roasted lamb and expensive wine, a familiar perfume of their opulent prison. Eleanor slid into her usual seat opposite him, the crystal glass before her catching the amber glow, reflecting a distorted image of her own calm facade. She picked up her fork, the silver cool against her fingertips, and began to eat with practiced grace, each movement a carefully choreographed lie. Her gaze, however, was not on her plate. It was on him, dissecting the man she had once loved, now seeing only the architect of her gilded cage. Dominic finally lowered his tablet, his dark eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment, before shifting to the sommelier who poured his wine. "Another long day," he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of question or genuine connection. "The deal is nearing its close, a significant expansion for us." He spoke of it with a detached pride, as if she were a business associate, not his wife. Eleanor nodded slowly, a small, polite smile touching her lips, a performance she had perfected over years. She knew the language of his ambition, the relentless pursuit of more power, more wealth, more control. She imagined his words as invisible chains, each syllable a new link forged around her, and her stomach felt tight, a knot of old fear and new resolve twisting inside her. The rich food on her plate suddenly tasted like ash. She took a slow sip of water, the cool liquid a temporary reprieve for her parched throat. Her mind raced, cataloging his expressions, the subtle inflections in his voice, searching for any hint of emotion beyond self-interest. There was nothing, just the sharp, unyielding edge of his business mind. He described complicated figures and market strategies, his words washing over her like an indifferent tide. Eleanor listened, or pretended to, letting the drone of his voice fill the cavernous space between them. She considered how many times she had sat like this, a silent, beautiful prop in his elaborate tableau of success. Tonight, the silence felt different. It was not the silence of resignation, but of observation. She was a scientist now, studying a specimen she was about to discard. Her heart beat a steady rhythm against her ribs, not with panic, but with a cold, clear purpose. She looked at his hands, strong and decisive, the same hands that had once held hers with a tenderness now utterly forgotten. He reached for his wine glass, his movements precise, deliberate. A tremor ran through Eleanor, an almost imperceptible shiver that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. This was the last time, she reminded herself, the last act in a play that had suffocated her soul. "I imagine you'll be out late again tonight," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly steady, a calm ripple in the placid surface of their strained conversation. She watched his reaction, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, quickly masked. He took another sip of wine. "Yes, unfortunately," he confirmed, not bothering to offer an explanation or apology. "These things demand attention." He spoke as if it were an unavoidable force of nature rather than a choice he made repeatedly. A bitter taste filled Eleanor's mouth, not from the wine, but from the years of similar dismissals. She had once yearned for his presence, his attention. Now his absence was a gift, a door opening to her freedom. She felt a profound sense of detachment, as if watching a scene unfold on a distant stage. The opulent room, the gleaming silver, Dominic's imposing figure, it all seemed like an elaborate set for a tragedy that was finally reaching its cathartic end. She could feel the weight of her wedding ring on her finger, a cold, heavy band of platinum and diamonds that had become a symbol of her captivity. It was a physical reminder of the vows that meant nothing to him and everything to her until now. The ring felt like a brand pressing into her skin. She wanted to tear it off, to be rid of its oppressive presence. But not yet. There was one last gesture, one final unspoken declaration she needed to make. The dessert arrived, a delicate chocolate mousse, but Eleanor pushed it away untouched. The thought of eating anything more made her feel sick. "I think I will retire now," she announced, rising from the table with fluid grace. Dominic merely grunted in acknowledgement, already picking up his tablet once more. He did not look up, did not bid her good night, did not offer a moment of shared humanity. His indifference was a familiar blade, but tonight it simply bounced off her newfound armor. Eleanor walked away from the table, leaving him absorbed in his world of power and ambition. The click of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound in the vast dining room, a tiny protest against the echoing silence. She walked slowly, deliberately, savoring each step, each one a step closer to liberation. Up the grand staircase she went, past the ancestral portraits that seemed to watch her with judging eyes, past the ornate fixtures that had once impressed her, now just gilded bars. Once inside her bedroom, a room larger than most apartments, Eleanor felt a tremor of something akin to freedom. The air, usually stale with unspoken words, seemed to hum with anticipation. She moved to her dressing table, its surface covered with expensive perfumes and delicate jewelry. Her eyes fell upon her wedding ring, still gleaming on her left hand. She stared at it, the diamonds sparkling under the soft lamplight, each facet holding a memory. Not of love, but of disillusionment, of loneliness, of a broken promise. Her fingers trembled slightly as she began to twist the ring. It was stuck for a moment, a stubborn attachment to a life she was shedding. She pulled harder, a sharp tug, and it finally slid free. The sudden lightness on her finger was palpable, a strange, hollow sensation. She held the ring in her palm, its cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of her skin. It felt heavy, a burden finally lifted. She walked towards Dominic's side of the bed, the king-size mattress an ocean between them even when they lay there. His bedside table was sparse, holding only a thick book, a watch, and his phone charger. Eleanor placed the ring carefully on the polished wood surface right beside his book. It lay there small and insignificant, yet radiating a silent power. It was a tangible symbol of their shattered vows, a damning testament to his abandonment. She imagined him seeing it, the slow dawning of understanding, the cold dread. The thought sent a shiver of satisfaction through her. The room was quiet, save for the soft rustle of silk curtains and a faint breeze. Eleanor turned away from the ring, leaving it to tell its story. She went to her own side of the bed, reaching underneath the heavy duvet. Her fingers found the smooth, cool fabric of the small bag she had prepared. It was a simple canvas duffel chosen for its discretion, not its style. Inside were the few things she truly needed: her hidden cash, a change of clothes, her worn leather-bound journal, and a small, faded photograph of her parents. She pulled the bag out, placing it gently on the floor beside the bed. Its weight felt grounding, real, a stark contrast to the ethereal, empty luxury of the room. She could hear the distant murmur of the estate settling down for the night. Footsteps of security guards outside, the hum of machinery, the quiet creaks of an old grand house. Her heart began to beat a little faster, a drumming crescendo against the quiet. Eleanor stood by her window, hidden behind the heavy drapes, watching and waiting. The Thorne estate, sprawling below her, was a fortress of light and shadow, its high walls and security cameras designed to keep things in and others out. She knew every angle, every blind spot, every shift change. Grace had ensured her knowledge was thorough. The night air was cool against the glass, a crisp reminder of the world beyond these walls. Then, she saw it, the sleek black sedan, Dominic's personal armored vehicle, pulling away from the main entrance. Its headlights cut through the darkness, briefly illuminating the winding driveway before disappearing into the distant gloom of the tree-lined road. She watched until the last red gleam of its taillights vanished, swallowed by the night. A profound sense of finality settled over her. This was it, his final business meeting, her final farewell. A single tear, cool and unexpected, traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness or regret, but of release. A tear for the girl she used to be, for the hope she had once held, for the life that had never truly been hers. It was a tear that cleansed, washing away the last vestiges of her past. She felt the saltiness on her lips, a bittersweet taste of goodbye. She turned from the window, her gaze sweeping across the opulent room one last time. The four-poster bed, draped in silk, the antique furniture, the priceless art on the walls, all of it felt foreign, detached. It was a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. Her breath hitched, a silent, almost imperceptible gasp. She was leaving it all. The fear that had once paralyzed her was now a distant echo, replaced by a surge of exhilarating, terrifying purpose. Eleanor reached down, grabbing the canvas duffel bag. Its familiar weight in her hand felt reassuring. She took a deep breath, the scent of lavender and old money filling her lungs for the last time. The click of the door as she quietly slipped out of her room was barely audible, a soft whisper swallowed by the night. The gilded cage was finally open, and she was stepping out. A shiver, not of cold, but of profound consequence, traced Eleanor's spine as her fingers closed around the worn leather journal. The silence of the vast, ornate hall pressed in around her, amplifying the soft thud of her heart against her ribs. Each step she took down the grand staircase was deliberate, measured, a silent farewell to the gilded cage that had held her captive for so long. The marble beneath her slippered feet felt cold and unforgiving, a stark contrast to the burgeoning warmth of defiance within her. Moonlight filtered through the towering arched windows, cast long, distorted shadows that danced like specters of her past life, each one a memory she was leaving behind. She reached the service entrance, a rarely used door at the back of the estate, designed for deliveries and staff. A faint scent of old dust and cleaning supplies hung in the air, oddly comforting in its ordinariness. Grace stood there, a dark cloak wrapped tightly around her, her face a mask of quiet resolve. Eleanor's eyes met Grace's in the dim light, a silent exchange passing between them, a lifetime of unspoken support and understanding. Grace offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, her lips pressed into a thin line. It was not a goodbye spoken aloud, but a farewell understood deeply, etched into the silence. Eleanor pushed the heavy door open, the sound barely a whisper in the pre-dawn stillness. The cool night air, sharp and clean, kissed her face, a promise of something new. A dark car waited discreetly beyond the secure perimeter, its engine a low, patient hum. Grace had arranged everything with meticulous care, a silent guardian angel ensuring her escape. Eleanor didn't look back at the mansion, its imposing silhouette already fading into the encroaching gloom before dawn. She simply walked towards the waiting vehicle, each step shedding a layer of the woman she had once been. The car door opened, revealing a stoic driver whose face remained unreadable in the dim light. Eleanor slipped into the back seat, her small bag resting on her lap, a world of possibility contained within its simple canvas. The door closed softly, severing the last physical link to the Thorne estate. As the car pulled away, the tires crunching softly on the gravel, Eleanor felt an exhilarating rush, terrifying in its intensity. It was the heady sensation of falling from a great height, knowing you might crash, but also knowing you were finally in motion. Through the tinted window, she watched the city lights begin to thin, the familiar sprawl gradually giving way to the open road. The endless expanse of concrete and steel, once a symbol of Dominic's power and her confinement, now blurred into an indifferent backdrop. A profound sense of anonymity settled over her, a cloak she eagerly embraced. She was no longer Eleanor Thorne, the neglected wife, the woman trapped in a gilded cage. She was just Eleanor, a woman on a journey, her destination unknown, her future unwritten. The darkness outside the car window eventually began to yield to the first tentative hints of dawn. Pale streaks of gray and rose painted the horizon, signaling the birth of a new day, and with it, a new life. She closed her eyes, letting the rhythmic hum of the engine lull her. Her breath coming a little easier now, the tightness in her chest beginning to recede. The fear was still a constant companion, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now tempered by a fragile, burgeoning hope. This was a fear of the unknown, not the suffocating dread of the familiar. Hours later, as the sun began to climb higher, casting long shadows across the Thorne estate, Dominic's car swept through the main gates. He stepped out, his custom suit perfectly tailored, his expression one of weary satisfaction. The deal had closed, the numbers were favorable, and Chloe's laughter still echoed in his mind. He expected the usual quiet, the familiar order of his opulent but emotionally barren home. The scent of expensive coffee and Eleanor's delicate perfume usually lingered, a faint, almost imperceptible presence. But today, something was different. The air felt colder, thinner, devoid of even the ghost of her scent. He walked through the silent halls, his heavy footsteps echoing unnaturally. The usual hushed movements of the staff were absent, the estate eerily still. A faint frown creased his brow. It was unusual, unsettling. He reached his bedroom, a vast chamber that often felt too large, too empty. His eyes, sharp and accustomed to discerning the smallest detail, immediately fell upon the bedside table. There, glinting innocently under the morning light, lay Eleanor's wedding ring. The platinum band, studded with diamonds, sparkled with an almost malicious brilliance. It was placed precisely in the center, a silent, damning indictment. Dominic's breath hitched, a cold, hard knot forming in his stomach. He picked up the ring, its weight feeling suddenly immense, its cold metal searing his skin. This was not a misplaced item. This was a statement. This was defiance. His gaze swept the room, now seeing it with new sharpened eyes. The dresser was bare of her usual array of perfumes and trinkets. Her side of the walk-in closet was conspicuously empty, a hollow space where her elegant dresses once hung. The air conditioner, usually set to her preferred cooler temperature, hummed with an unfamiliar warmth. Every minute detail, previously ignored, now screamed her absence. She was gone. Not for a day, not for a week, but gone. A cold fury began to rise within him, a slow, agonizing burn. It wasn't love, not in the way ordinary people understood it. It was a profound sense of violation, of ownership challenged. She was his property, his accessory, his wife. How dare she leave? How dare she make a choice, an act of rebellion, without his permission? His grip tightened on the ring, the sharp edges of the diamonds biting into his palm. The blood rushed to his head, a roaring in his ears. This was an affront to his power, a direct challenge to his authority. He would find her. She would pay for this audacity. Meanwhile, far from the suffocating grandeur of the estate, the train rumbled onward, carrying Eleanor further and further from her past. The journey was long, punctuated by the shifting landscapes outside her window. Rolling hills, dense forests, glimpses of small, sleepy towns. Each passing mile felt like a layer of old skin peeling away, revealing something raw and new beneath. She ate little, slept sporadically, her mind a kaleidoscope of memories and anxieties, yet always returning to the quiet thrill of escape. Finally, the train slowed, its metallic screech a fanfare for her new beginning. The conductor's voice, a muffled announcement, confirmed their arrival. Eleanor stood, her legs stiff, her heart thrumming with a frantic rhythm. This was it, the moment she had simultaneously craved and dreaded. She stepped off the train onto the platform of Seagrove Cove, the world around her suddenly vibrant, alive. The air hit her first, a bracing, invigorating scent of the ocean, mingled with the earthy sweetness of pine. It filled her lungs, a deep, cleansing breath that seemed to wash away the stale air of her former life. The sound of distant gulls cried out, a wild, untamed music. She looked around, her eyes wide, taking in the small, quaint station, the few people milling about, their faces open and unhurried. This was a world utterly divorced from the guarded opulence she had known. Her future, a blank canvas, stretched before her, an unwritten page waiting for her story to begin. The salt-laced air of Seagrove Cove tasted of liberation, a sharp, wild freshness Eleanor had never known. Her feet, accustomed to plush carpets and polished marble, now met uneven cobblestones. The small, colorful cottages clustered together like seashells, each one whispering tales of lives lived simply, far from the suffocating grandeur she had fled. She clutched her small bag, the weight of it feeling less like a burden and more like a grounding anchor in this unfamiliar world. She found a room above a small general store, the window overlooking the main street, where the scent of baking bread mingled with the ocean breeze. For the first time in years, she slept without the cold silence of the Thorne estate pressing down on her. The rhythmic crash of waves against the shore became her lullaby, a constant, reassuring presence that promised continuity, not isolation. Each morning she woke to the sound of gulls crying overhead, a raw, untamed sound that mirrored the nascent wildness stirring within her own heart. Eleanor Vance was gone. In her place, a woman named Catherine began to emerge, tentatively at first, then with increasing certainty. She needed work, something to anchor her new identity, something real and tangible. The local bakery, a small, bustling place filled with the warmth of ovens and the chatter of early risers, caught her eye. Its proprietor, a kindly woman with flour dusting her apron, saw something in Catherine's quiet determination, a resilience that shone through her hesitant demeanor. She started as a counter assistant, then learned to knead dough, to shape loaves, to decorate pastries with a delicate touch. Her once soft hands, accustomed only to holding delicate teacups or turning the pages of an untouched book, grew calloused and strong. The scent of yeast and cinnamon replaced the sterile aroma of polished wood and expensive perfume. Every morning, the heat from the ovens brought a flush to her cheeks, a genuine warmth that had long been absent from her life. She found a quiet satisfaction in the repetition, the simple, honest labor. Each day, as she pulled golden brown loaves from the oven, she felt a subtle shift within her. The gnawing anxiety that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a quiet, steady rhythm. She learned the names of the regulars, their usual orders, the small-town gossip that flowed as freely as the coffee. The smiles she received were authentic, unburdened by expectation or veiled judgment. She was simply Catherine, the quiet new woman at the bakery, and that was enough. In the evenings, after the bakery closed and the last customers had left with their warm bags of bread, Catherine would walk. She would make her way past the fishing boats bobbing gently in the harbor, their masts swaying like patient sentinels. The path led her to the windswept beach, where the sand stretched out, vast and empty, under the darkening sky. The roar of the waves was a powerful symphony, washing away the lingering echoes of her past. She would stand at the water's edge, feeling the cold spray on her face, letting the immense scale of the ocean dwarf her former troubles. The anxiety that once threatened to consume her now felt like a distant, trivial concern. There, with the horizon stretching endlessly before her, she began to understand the true meaning of freedom. It was not just an escape from a gilded cage. It was an embrace of the boundless possibilities of a life lived on her own terms. Back in the opulence of the Thorne estate, Dominic's fury had simmered into a cold, relentless pursuit. The empty space on his bedside table where Eleanor's wedding ring had lain spoke volumes. His men had scoured every usual haunt, every family connection, every airport, every train station. He had thrown his vast resources at the problem, demanding answers, expecting her to be found, to be brought back. His power had always been absolute, his control unquestionable. Yet Eleanor had simply vanished. The subtle damage began to show. Whispers followed him. A woman simply does not disappear from a powerful man's life without consequence. His associates, always keen observers of weakness, began to notice the edge in his voice, the frustration that bled into his carefully constructed facade. He had always presented an image of unflappable control, but this disappearance chipped away at that illusion. He was a man who could command armies, yet he could not find his own wife. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He imagined her fleeing to some distant, cosmopolitan city, perhaps enjoying the wealth he had provided, laughing at his expense. But his sources found nothing. No lavish spending, no new socialite appearing on the scene. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air. The thought gnawed at him, not out of concern for her well-being, but because her vanishing act represented a challenge to his authority, a public defiance he could not tolerate. It was an embarrassment, a stain on his perfectly curated image. Meanwhile, Catherine found herself drawn to the small local library, a quiet haven of stories and knowledge. She spent hours there, not reading the glossy fashion magazines she once pretended to enjoy, but delving into books on art history, local flora, and even ancient mythology. Each page turned was a step further away from the woman she used to be. The weight of expectation, the constant performance of being Mrs. Thorne, slowly lifted from her shoulders. She discovered a local artist's studio, a small, unassuming space filled with canvases smelling of oil paint and turpentine. The artist, a kind, elderly woman named Martha, recognized a flicker of artistic talent in Catherine's casual sketches. Soon, Catherine was spending her afternoons there, learning to mix colors, to hold a brush, to see the world through a new, vibrant lens. Her hands, once only capable of delicate, performative gestures, now found a true purpose, expressing the emotions she had long suppressed. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the bakery addressed to Catherine. Her heart beat a little faster, a ghost of her old fears stirring within her. It was from Grace, a simple, unadorned note, discreetly sent through a network of trusted acquaintances. Grace wrote of the quiet at the estate, the endless searches, the growing frustration in Dominic's voice. She mentioned her own quiet satisfaction, her hope that Catherine was well, free. Catherine read the words, a single tear tracing a path through the flower on her cheek. It was a tear of gratitude, not sorrow. Grace had truly been her silent protector. The seasons turned in Seagrove Cove. The harsh winds of winter gave way to the soft blossoms of spring, then the long golden days of summer. Catherine's skin, once pale and shielded, now bore the gentle kiss of the sun and the sea air. Her light brown hair, no longer perfectly coiffed, was often tied back simply, sometimes adorned with a wildflower picked during her walks. Her eyes, once distant and melancholic, held a quiet sparkle, a depth of peace she had never imagined possible. She still remembered the fear, the isolation, the frantic panic attacks that had once paralyzed her. But now those memories felt like echoes from a distant past, a story belonging to someone else. The SOS message, the deliberate silence from Dominic, had been the crucible, the final betrayal that had forged her new self. It had burned away the last vestiges of hope she held for that life, leaving behind only the pure, unyielding resolve to live. One clear morning, with the sun a warm embrace, Catherine walked to the highest point of the cliffs overlooking Seagrove Cove. Below her, the ocean stretched out, an infinite blue, meeting the sky in a seamless embrace. The air was fresh and invigorating, carrying the cries of gulls and the faint, joyful shouts of children playing on the beach. She closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face, feeling the gentle breeze lift her hair. She opened her eyes, gazing out at the vast expanse, a genuine smile gracing her lips. There was no pretense in it, no performance, no mask. It was a smile born of quiet strength, of self-discovery, of hard-won peace. She was free, free from the expectations, free from the fear, free from the gilded cage that had almost become her tomb. Eleanor Vance was indeed a distant, fading echo. Catherine stood whole, ready to build a life on her own terms, with her own two hands under the boundless sky. What would you have done? One line in the comments. Let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think? A small like is a small move, but it's a big support for this channel. See you in the next story. Subscribe so you don't miss it.